Welcome, sleepy souls. I am your storyteller, Mr. Dread. Tonight, I'm here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. But before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I would love to know that too. Have you ever wondered why some towns don't show up on any map, and why no one who passes through ever speaks of them again? The thought came to me as I drove across the endless stretch of highway cutting through the Midwest, my car humming along the cracked asphalt, my eyelids heavy from 12 hours behind the wheel. I was supposed to be heading straight to Denver, a clean shot across the interstate, but sometime after midnight the GPS lost its signal. The screen flickered, glitched, then froze on a directionless blue grid. I should have turned back, waited until morning, maybe even pulled over to rest. But instead, I kept going, following the faded white lines, trusting that the road would lead me somewhere. And it did. That was the first mistake. The second was pulling into the town. It appeared suddenly, like a mirage, lights spilling across the horizon in an almost unnatural brightness. A small collection of streets, gas stations, and storefronts materialized where there shouldn't have been anything but empty farmland. But what struck me wasn't the size of the town, it was the fact that every single building was lit up, blazing with fluorescent bulbs as if it were midday. Neon signs buzzed and flickered above diners and bars. Windows glowed in the motels, houses, even the church steeple, bathing the streets in a sleepless radiance. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, more relieved than suspicious. The tank was nearly bone dry, and I figured I'd grab coffee to keep me awake for the last stretch of the drive. As I stepped out of the car, the crisp night air carried with it a strange quiet, broken only by the low hum of electricity. There were no crickets, no rustle of trees, no distant highway sounds. Just the steady, buzzing glow of lights. Inside, the gas station attendant greeted me with an enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. He was a lanky man in his 40s, pale under the harsh fluorescent bulbs. "Long drive?" he asked, his smile stretched a little too wide. "Yeah," I muttered, swiping my card at the pump before grabbing a cup of coffee. "Lucky I found this place. Didn't see it on the GPS." The man's smile faltered for just a second. Then, softer, almost as though warning me, he said, "You won't find us on GPS. Not anymore." I chuckled, thinking it was some small-town quirk. "Well, it's a good thing you're here." I needed the fuel. His eyes lingered on me in a way that made me uneasy. "Just, don't fall asleep here, stranger. Not tonight. Not ever." He rang me up without another word, and I tried to laugh it off as small-town weirdness. People in rural places sometimes enjoyed spooking outsiders, it made the long nights more entertaining. But as I drove down Main Street, searching for a motel, I couldn't shake the unease. Every building was awake. The diner at 2:30 in the morning was bustling with chatter, cups clinking, waitresses weaving between tables with steaming plates. Children played in the lit-up park, swinging and laughing as if it were mid-afternoon. Storefronts were open, clothing shops, hardware stores, even the barber shop had its chairs filled. No one looked tired. Not one person. I pulled into a small roadside motel with a glowing vacancy sign, expecting the lobby to be empty. Instead, the desk clerk was alert and cheerful, sliding me a key with the same two-eyed smile I'd seen at the gas station. Her eyes, though, betrayed something else, a flicker of nervousness, like she was silently urging me to figure something out on my own. "Room 12, she said, pushing the key across the counter. Then, as I turned to leave, she lowered her voice and whispered, "If you hear knocking, don't answer. No matter how much it sounds like someone you know." I froze. The hairs on my arms rose. When I glanced back, her expression had snapped back to bright and polite, as if she hadn't said a word. My room was spotless, lit up by two harsh ceiling lights that buzzed faintly. I dropped my bag, sat on the stiff mattress, and rubbed my face. Exhaustion clawed at me, but her warning lingered in my mind. Don't fall asleep here. Don't answer the knocking. I turned on the TV for noise, flipping through static and outdated sitcom reruns, until a strange local channel appeared. The broadcast showed a still image of the town square, glowing under the lamps. No sound, no movement, just the empty streets. I switched it off, unnerved. Lying back on the bed, I stared at the ceiling, my eyes burning. I told myself I'd just close them for a minute, just rest without slipping too deep. But as soon as I drifted toward the edge of sleep, the room seemed to shift, the buzzing of the lights grew louder, the air pressed heavier against my chest. Then I heard it. A faint, deliberate knock at the door. 3 slow, steady taps. My heart pounded. The clerk's words echoed in my mind. If you hear knocking, don't answer. But then, a voice followed. Hey, buddy, it's me. Open up. It was my brother's voice. The problem was, my brother had been dead for 5 years. The first knock had been soft, almost cautious, like someone testing to see if I was awake. The second was harder, more deliberate, followed by that impossible voice. I sat up in bed, pulse racing, my throat dry as sand. My brother's voice. My brother, who had died in a car accident 5 years ago, whose funeral I had stood through in a gray suit, watching them lower his coffin into the ground. I didn't move. Couldn't move. Come on, man, open up. It's cold out here. The voice came again, muffled through the door, so perfectly familiar it sent a shiver crawling down my spine. The cadence, the slight rasp he'd had when he was tired, it was all there. A flawless imitation. But it couldn't be him. I remembered what the motel clerk had whispered. If you hear knocking, don't answer. The sound came again, harder now, impatient. Knock. 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 Then a pause. Don't be a jerk, man. I know you can hear me. Just open the door. I need to talk to you. Every instinct screamed at me to keep still, to pretend I wasn't there, but another part of me, some desperate, grieving part, ached to hear his voice again, to see his face, even if it made no sense. I slid off the bed, my bare feet touching the thin carpet, and crept closer to the door. The knocking stopped. For a long, suffocating silence, nothing moved on the other side. My hand hovered near the doorknob, trembling. Then, so close I swore I could feel the breath through the wood, the voice whispered, low and urgent. If you don't open it, they'll know you're here. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled back from the door, heart hammering, and in that instant, the lights in the room flickered violently, buzzing louder, straining against something unseen. My skin prickled as though the air itself had teeth. And then, nothing. The lights steadied. The silence returned. I collapsed onto the bed, gripping my knees to my chest, rocking slightly like a child. Sleep was impossible now. Every nerve in my body was wide awake, alert to every creak, every distant hum. Hours must have passed, though time stretched unnaturally in that place. I tried turning on the TV again, flipping through static until I found the same local channel. The image of the town square was different now. The camera seemed angled higher, catching more of the street, and this time, there were shapes in the background. Blurred, shifting shadows that didn't move like people. They swayed, twitched, almost like they were reaching toward the camera. I shut it off, chest tightening. By dawn, if you could even call it that, the light outside hadn't changed. The sky was still a strange, muted gray, never fully dark, never truly morning. When I finally gathered the courage to leave the room, I noticed something odd. No one else in the motel had curtains drawn. Every window was wide open, lights blazing. The lobby clerk looked at me as I approached, her smile strained. Rough night, she asked, though it sounded more like a statement than a question. You could say that. She leaned closer across the counter, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Did you answer it?" I shook my head. Relief softened her features for a moment, but then her eyes darted to the glass doors leading outside. "Good. Don't. No matter who it sounds like. They're learning. They know what gets to people." I stared at her, waiting for an explanation, but she just gave me that fixed smile again, as though the conversation had never happened. The streets outside were alive again, bustling with activity, people moving about like it was midday. A group of children ran past, their laughter oddly hollow, echoing longer than it should have. At the diner, a waitress poured coffee with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. Across the street, a barber swept his shop floor, whistling tunelessly. Everyone seemed normal, but not a single one of them looked even remotely tired. Not one yawn. Not one slow blink. Not even the faintest hint of exhaustion. As I wandered, trying to shake off the unease, I overheard snippets of conversations. A man telling another, "We made it through another night." A woman muttering to her child, "Don't close your eyes in school, honey, not even for a second." It wasn't just a warning. It was a rule. A law. I ducked into the diner, hoping for answers, or at least the comfort of hot food. The place was nearly full, every booth occupied, the clink of cutlery sharp in the air. As I slid into a seat, the waitress, a young woman with tired eyes that contradicted her wide smile, set a mug of coffee down in front of me before I even ordered. "You'll need it," she said softly. I hesitated, then leaned closer. "Why does no one here sleep?" Her smile flickered, and she glanced around nervously. Then she leaned in, voice trembling as though even speaking the words was dangerous. "Because when you sleep, you're not alone anymore." Before I could ask what she meant, the bell above the diner door jingled, and a hush fell over the room. Every patron froze, their movements stiff, their smiles locked in place. The air grew thick, heavy, charged. I turned slowly toward the door. A man had walked in. Or at least, he looked like a man. His skin was too pale, his eyes too wide, unblinking. He wore ordinary clothes, but they hung strangely, like they didn't fit the shape beneath them. And as he scanned the room, every person bowed their heads slightly, as though in forced reverence. The man's gaze landed on me. And he smiled. Not the polite, rehearsed smile of the townsfolk. This was something else. Something hungry. The man, or whatever he was, stood framed in the diner's doorway, and for a moment I thought the world itself had stopped breathing. No forks scraped against plates. No coffee poured. Even the children at the far booth, who had been giggling too loudly a moment ago, froze mid-laughter as though someone had pressed pause on them. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, trembling against their fixtures. His smile didn't waver. His pale face was almost luminescent, like the skin of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in decades. His eyes, too round, too unblinking, swept across the room with deliberate patience. When they finally landed on me, my stomach dropped. It was as if a hand of ice had reached into my chest and squeezed. The waitress stiffened beside me. Without looking, she pressed the coffee pot harder into the table, the porcelain rattling. "Don't talk," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Don't acknowledge him." But his eyes never left mine. He started walking, slow steps, each footfall echoing louder than it should have on the diner's cheap linoleum floor. Every patron lowered their gaze, some bowing their heads almost reverently. Others whispered under their breath, lips moving silently as though reciting prayers. The waitress forced a smile, too wide, trembling at the edges. "How are you this morning, sir?" The man didn't answer. His pale lips curved slightly higher, but his eyes were fixed on me, pinning me to the booth. I felt like prey under the gaze of a predator that didn't need to rush. I couldn't look away, couldn't even blink. My throat was dry, and sweat prickled the back of my neck despite the chill that seemed to emanate from him. Finally, after what felt like hours, he turned. Without a word, he slid into a booth in the far corner. The patrons collectively exhaled, tension loosening from the room like a cord cut from their throats. Slowly, the sounds of cutlery, cups, and murmured conversations returned. But it wasn't the same. The air remained too heavy, and every smile was strained to the breaking point. The waitress leaned closer, her voice little more than a breath. "Eat fast. Leave. Don't draw his attention again." I wanted to ask 100 questions. Who was he? What was he? Why did everyone act like he was a god and a monster all at once? But her eyes pleaded with me to keep quiet. So I nodded, lifted my fork, and forced a bite of eggs I couldn't taste past the lump in my throat. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him sitting perfectly still in that booth, not touching the plate that had been set in front of him. Just watching. Waiting. By the time I left the diner, the gray daylight still hung over the town like a sheet of dirty glass, refusing to shift into any normal hour. People moved quickly along the sidewalks, always under the glow of artificial lights. I noticed now that none of the street lamps ever turned off, not even in broad daylight. There were no shadows here, only the constant brightness of bulbs burning against something darker pressing just outside. I decided I had to leave. This place was wrong, suffocating. The GPS might have glitched before, but if I found the highway again, I could get back on track. Denver was still waiting. I climbed into my car, turned the key, and let out a shaky breath when the engine purred to life. Relief washed over me as I drove through the town's edge, past rows of identical houses with curtains wide open and televisions glowing in every living room. Soon the streets thinned, the last gas station blinking in my rearview mirror. Ahead stretched open road, blessedly empty. But 20 minutes later, I saw the lights again. At first, I thought it was another town. But as I drew closer, my blood ran cold. It was the same town. The same diner. The same gas station. I had looped back without turning once. I slammed the brakes, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. "No," I muttered. No, this isn't possible." I spun the car around, sped in the opposite direction. 5 minutes, 10, 15, the road unspooled endlessly ahead, featureless, barren. I kept going, heart pounding. But when I finally saw lights flickering on the horizon, hope crashed into dread. It was the same town again. I parked on the shoulder, chest heaving, fighting the urge to scream. My eyes darted to the sky. Still that murky gray, sunless, moonless, eternal twilight. A world without day or night. When I drove back into the town square, people were watching me. Not obviously, not all at once, but I caught it in glimpses. A man sweeping the diner steps who didn't look away even when I met his eyes. A woman holding her child's hand, frozen in place for a second too long, faces turning in windows as though they had been waiting for me. I pulled into the motel lot, not knowing what else to do, and found the clerk standing outside as though she had known I'd return. Her smile was gone now. She looked pale, frightened, her hands trembling. "You tried to leave," she said softly. I swallowed hard. What the hell is this place? Why can't I get out? She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You can't leave because they won't let you. Not until they decide what to do with you." "Who?" I demanded, though my mind already flashed with the image of that pale man in the diner. Her lips trembled. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes darting toward the glowing street lamps. "We call them watchers. They walk among us. Pretend to be us. But they're not us." I stared at her, my chest tight. "And what do they want?" She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with tears she fought to keep back. "They want you awake." The air shifted then, cold and sharp, carrying with it a faint, deliberate sound. Knocking. But this time it wasn't at my motel door. It was everywhere. Every window, every door along the street, the sound echoing in unison. Knock. 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 And then the lights above us flickered. The sound was everywhere. 1,000 knuckles rapping in perfect rhythm, pounding against wood and glass from every direction. Motel doors. Car windows. Shop fronts. Houses. The town itself seemed to pulse with the sound, as though the buildings had hearts and they were beating in unison. Knock. 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 The clerk clamped a trembling hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and shining with terror. She grabbed my arm with the other and yanked me inside the lobby just as the overhead fluorescent bulbs dimmed to a sickly orange. My chest tightened. The humming of the lights faltered, struggling, like a dying breath. For the first time since I had arrived, I realized how much I depended on that constant, ugly buzz. Without it, the silence was unbearable. "Stay away from the windows," she hissed, pulling me behind the counter. The knocking grew louder. Louder than human hands should make. A deep, pounding resonance that rattled the glass in its frames. The air itself seemed to vibrate. My skin prickled as though the sound was inside me, under my bones. And then it stopped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the faint wheeze of the fluorescent lights fighting to hold on. Then, darkness. The motel lobby plunged into black. No glow from the lamps outside. No neon buzz. No headlights passing on the street. Just a suffocating void, as though the world itself had been switched off. The clerk whimpered. I could hear her nails digging into the counter's laminate surface. "Don't move," she whispered. "Don't make a sound. They're listening." I tried to control my breathing, each inhale sharp in my chest, each exhale trembling. My eyes strained against the dark, searching for anything, but it was endless, all-consuming. Then I saw them. Not with my eyes at first, but in my mind. Shapes moving in the black, vast and formless, like shadows detached from bodies. They slithered across the walls, bending them, warping them, their outlines jagged and shifting. And then, faintly, 2 pinpricks of light appeared at the edge of the room. Eyes. Not glowing, not bright, just reflecting some light I couldn't see. Watching. I wanted to run, to scream, to claw my way out of that place, but my body refused to move. The air was heavy, crushing down on me, forcing me still. A sound followed, low and wet, like breathing from something with lungs too large for its body. And then, just as quickly as it had gone, the light snapped back on. The fluorescence buzzed back to life, the lobby flooded in pale white glow. I gasped like I had been underwater, stumbling back against the counter. The clerk sagged with relief, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saw them, didn't you?" she asked, voice shaking. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. "They're always there," she said. "Just behind the dark. That's why we don't sleep. If you close your eyes too long, they slip closer." If the lights fail, she trailed off, shuddering. I pressed my palms against my face, trying to steady myself. Why doesn't anyone leave? Why not abandon the town and get away from whatever that is? Her expression was a mixture of pity and dread. "Do you think we haven't tried? You can't leave. Roads always bring you back. And even if you could," she leaned closer, her whisper razor thin. "Once you've been here, you're marked. They follow you. They never stop." I shook my head. No. No, I'm not staying. I'll find a way. The door creaked. Both of us froze. Slowly, painfully, we turned toward the lobby's glass entrance. The door was open. Not wide, just an inch. Enough for the night air to seep through. Enough to let something slip inside. The clerk's face drained of color. "Oh God," she whispered. The knocking started again, but this time it wasn't outside. It came from inside the lobby. A sharp, deliberate rap against the wall just behind us. I spun, heart slamming against my ribs, and for the briefest moment, I saw it again, something tall, impossibly thin, its outline wavering like heat rising off asphalt. It leaned against the wall, head cocked, as though mocking me. Then it was gone. The clerk grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "You need to see the elders," she said urgently. "They'll tell you what you're caught in. Maybe they'll know if you can survive it." "The elders?" I repeated. She nodded, eyes darting nervously to the corners of the lobby as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows at any second. "Every town has them. Ours, keep the truth. If you want answers, you'll have to hear it from them." I hesitated, torn between the desperate urge to flee and the knowledge that there was no escape. If the road circled back, if the town itself was a trap, then maybe answers were my only chance. She led me outside, where the streets looked unchanged, still humming with light, still populated with smiling faces that masked silent terror. But as we walked, I noticed how people's eyes flicked toward me, how their expressions faltered. Some whispered to each other, words I couldn't hear. Others stared openly, their smiles fading into grim resignation. "They know you saw them," the clerk murmured. "That makes you different now." We stopped in front of a large, old building at the end of Main Street. It looked out of place among the neon and the strip mall architecture, its wooden frame sagging under the weight of years, its windows boarded up except for one narrow slit of light seeping from the top floor. The clerk pushed open the door, her hand trembling. "Go inside. They're waiting." The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of burnt wax. Candles lined the walls, flickering shadows across the peeling wallpaper. In the center of the room, a circle of chairs faced each other. 4 figures sat in them. Old. Withered. Their eyes rimmed with black, skin thin and pale, as though life itself had been drained away. Each one turned their heads slowly toward me, their gaze heavy, suffocating. The tallest of them spoke first, voice rasping like dry leaves. "You've heard the knocking. You've seen them in the dark. That means your time has begun." I swallowed hard, forcing words through the dryness in my throat. What are they?" The old man's lips pulled back in something that wasn't quite a smile. "They are the reason this town never sleeps." The room smelled of wax, dust, and something older, something damp that clung to the back of my throat like mildew. The elders sat in their circle, illuminated only by the pale glow of candles that guttered and hissed against the stale air. Their faces were carved with age, deep furrows etched into their skin like maps of long-forgotten roads. Each pair of eyes followed me with the weight of 100 years of sleeplessness. The tallest elder, the one who had spoken first, leaned forward in his chair. His knotted fingers folded together, bones creaking as he rested them on his knees. "You have stumbled into a place that doesn't exist on your maps," he rasped, his voice raw, dry, as though it hadn't been used in years. "And yet, you are here. Which means they have chosen you." "They?" I repeated, my voice low, though it cracked under the silence. A murmur rippled through the circle, soft sighs, faint coughs. Finally, an old woman to his left spoke, her tone trembling but deliberate. "The Watchers," she said. "The shadows in the dark. The knocking you hear. They are older than this town, older than these lands. When the first settlers came here, they thought they had found paradise. Rich soil. Flowing water. A place to build." Her cloudy eyes glistened in the candlelight. But they did not know this place was already taken. The third elder, a broad-shouldered man with hollow cheeks, picked up the thread. At first, it was small things. Strange sounds in the night. Animals found dead, drained of blood. People swearing they saw shadows moving when there was no one near. The settlers thought it was their minds, tricks of exhaustion, the wilderness pressing against them. His voice dropped lower. until the children began to vanish. The silence in the room deepened. Even the candles seemed to flicker less, their flames shrinking, as though the memory itself had weight. The first elder continued, his voice a harsh whisper. At night, the children would sleep. And when their parents went to wake them in the morning, their beds were empty. No sign of struggle. No footprints. Only the echo of knocking against the walls. My stomach tightened, the sound of last night's knocking reverberating in my memory. They tried to leave, the woman said. But the roads brought them back. Always back. The land itself had been bound. No matter how far they walked or how long they rode, when the sun should have risen, they found themselves standing where they began. The broad-shouldered elder spat onto the dusty floor. So they bargained. Fools that they were. I leaned forward despite myself. Bargained? The eldest nodded, his eyes unblinking. They made a deal with the Watchers. To keep their children safe, to keep their lives. They promised never again to sleep. For it is only in sleep that the Watchers can truly enter. It is only when you dream that they can feed. His words sank into me like ice. 1,000 fragments of conversations I'd overheard in town, the mother telling her child not to close his eyes in school, the gas station attendant warning me not to fall asleep, the endless buzzing of lights, suddenly snapped into place. They feed on dreams? I asked. The old woman's lips curled downward. On more than dreams. They feed on what you were when you were defenseless. When the barrier between your mind and theirs is thin. When you sleep, they take pieces of you. First your memories. Then your voice. And, if you give them enough time, she trailed off, her eyes flicking toward the darkness at the edges of the room. They take all of you, the broad-shouldered elder finished. A chill crawled down my spine. Then how are you still alive? How has the town lasted this long without falling apart? The first elder exhaled, the sound rattling in his chest like dry leaves. Because of the lights. Because we do not close our eyes. We keep vigil, every hour, every night, every day. We teach our children from birth that sleep is death. We build our lives around wakefulness. This is the bargain. Stay awake, and they remain on the other side of the dark. Close your eyes, even for a moment, his voice faltered. And they find you. I thought of the voice at my motel door. My brother's voice. The way it had whispered, if you don't open it, they'll know you're here. They know me already, I whispered. The woman's face crumpled in sorrow. Yes. You heard them. You saw them. You are marked now. My throat tightened, dry and aching. Then how do I get rid of it? How do I leave? The elders exchanged glances, a silent conversation heavy with meaning. Finally, the eldest leaned forward again, his cloudy eyes fixed on mine. There is no leaving. Not once you've seen them. His lips curved into something too bitter to be called a smile. The only choice you have left is whether you stand with us, or become one of them. The words struck like a blow. My pulse thundered in my ears. One of them? I echoed. The broad-shouldered elder's voice rumbled like distant thunder. You've seen the Watchers that were our faces, haven't you? The ones that look human but aren't. Do you think they were always that way? No. They were like you. Strangers. Travelers. People who thought they could come here and leave. People who tried to sleep, or thought they could fight. And when they failed, when the Watchers pulled them into the dark, their bodies remained. Hollowed out. Used as vessels. The old woman's hand shook as she lifted it to her mouth, stifling a sob. The eldest's voice dropped to a whisper that burned itself into my mind. That is the only way out. To be taken. I recoiled, every instinct screaming at me to run. No. There has to be another way. The elder's eyes narrowed. If there is, none have lived to tell it. Before I could respond, the candles sputtered violently. The flames stretched upward, then shrank to weak, trembling embers. A familiar sound followed. Knock. 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 But it wasn't the steady rhythm from before. This was slower, heavier, shaking the walls of the building itself. The elders froze, their withered faces twisting in fear. They've come closer tonight, the woman whispered, her voice cracking. Another knock, louder now. The plaster above us groaned, dust drifting from the ceiling. And then, something new. A voice, deep and guttural, pressed through the walls. Not a whisper. Not an imitation. Something raw, something ancient. Let him sleep. The elders didn't move. They sat frozen in their chairs as the walls shuddered with each heavy knock, their lips pressed tight, their eyes wide with the hollow terror of people who had endured this sound too many nights to count. The sound wasn't just noise, it was presence. The wood of the old meeting hall creaked as if something enormous leaned against it, breathing slow and steady on the other side. The flame of my candle bent toward the knocking, as though pulled by some unseen gravity. Stay still, the old woman hissed, her voice breaking on the words. Her eyes darted to me. Don't speak. Don't answer. But how could I not answer? The sound was more than sound, it was inside me. The vibration rattled through my bones, and the voice that followed was not spoken into the air. It tunneled through my skull as if whispered directly into the back of my brain. Let him sleep. The phrase repeated, lower this time, more guttural. The floor trembled under my boots. I clutched the arms of my chair, staring at the door. My every nerve screamed to run, but I knew, without being told, that if I opened that door, I wouldn't find the night, or the street, or the world as I knew it. I would step into something else. The eldest elder's lips moved soundlessly before he managed to find his voice. They've chosen you. His whisper was barely audible over the rattling walls, but it carried like a stone sinking into a still pond. The watchers, they do not often speak. And when they do, he shook his head. It is because they have marked their prey. Prey. The word lodged in my chest like a splinter. I felt suddenly small, animal-like, no more significant than a deer caught in headlights. My mouth went dry. You mean, me? The broad-shouldered elder's gaze hardened. They know you are weakest when you sleep. They want your mind, your body, your skin. They are patient, but they are hungry. Another knock split the silence. This time, it came from the ceiling. Dust sifted down onto the table between us. The elders flinched in unison, eyes darting upward. I could hear it, the dragging scrape of something massive moving across the roof. Nails? Claws? The sound was almost too much to bear, like the house itself might split open under its weight. They are closer than they should be, the old woman whispered, wringing her hands. The bargain is thinning. Too many are growing weak. Too many are faltering. The eldest finally rose to his feet, his frail body shaking. He placed a hand on my shoulder with surprising strength. His skin was cold as stone. You must understand, if they have chosen you, then all of us are in danger. They hunger most for the new, the outsider. You bring a freshness they crave. My stomach turned. Then let me leave. If I'm the problem, I'll go. I'll drive out of here tonight and... His fingers tightened painfully, digging into my shoulder until I gasped. His cloudy eyes glared into mine with something fiercer than fear. Don't speak of leaving. The roads are theirs. They bend, they twist. You will only find yourself back here, weaker each time, until you cannot fight them anymore. The knocking stopped. Silence fell so thick it pressed against my ears like water. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then, a sound slid into the stillness. A voice. Not booming, not guttural this time. Softer, familiar. "Brother, open the door. You must be so tired." My blood froze. It was Daniel's voice. My brother's voice. The elders all turned toward me in unison, as though they had heard it too. My chest clenched as memory surged, the motel door, the whisper that had nearly pulled me into madness. I shook my head violently, covering my ears with my palms. "That's not him. That's not him, he's dead." The voice came again, closer now, as though kneeling just above me in the rafters. "Don't you want to see me, James? Just close your eyes for a moment. Just rest." I lurched to my feet, stumbling back from the table. "Stop it. Stop saying his name. He's gone." The old woman rose too, her arms outstretched as though to calm me, though her eyes were wet with terror. "It is how they work. They were the faces of what you love, of what you've lost. They dig through your mind like scavengers until they find what hurts most." But the voice wasn't stopping. It grew more insistent, weaving through my thoughts like a lullaby. My eyelids felt heavy, the exhaustion of sleepless nights pressing down. My vision blurred at the edges, the candlelight smearing into golden trails. My body ached for rest. Just for a second, the voice crooned. "That's all it takes." The elders shouted then, their frail voices cutting through the haze. "Stay awake. Don't give them an inch." The broad-shouldered man slammed his palm down on the table, the crack jolting me like an electric shock. I gasped, dragging in a sharp breath. The heaviness lifted just slightly, but the urge lingered. My body begged for sleep. My heart begged for release. The eldest leaned close, his mouth against my ear. "Listen to me. If you fall asleep, even for the blink of an eye, they will tear you from this world. They will wear your skin, and none of us will ever see you again." Another knock boomed, this time from the floor beneath us. The boards flexed under the weight of something pressing upward, straining to break through. The old woman's voice cracked in despair. "They've never come from below before." The broad-shouldered elder drew a trembling breath, his hand clenching into a fist. "The bargain is broken. It has begun." The boards at our feet buckled with a sharp crack. A jagged line split the wood. From the gap, a thin, pale hand began to push through. The room fell into chaos the instant the hand broke through. It wasn't the hand of any human I'd ever seen, too thin, too pale, the skin stretched taut over bone, the fingers grotesquely long. The nails weren't nails at all but translucent, curved talons that scraped against the floorboards as though tasting the wood for weakness. Candlelight shimmered on its surface, but the skin didn't reflect like flesh. It gleamed, faintly wet, as if slick with some otherworldly dew. The elders recoiled from the table, their chairs clattering against the walls. The broad-shouldered man swore under his breath, his voice quaking despite its strength. The old woman fell to her knees, whispering rapid prayers under her breath, her hands clutched against her chest as tears streaked down her wrinkled cheeks. The eldest elder remained standing, his eyes wide but dry, his lips moving silently as if he were counting down numbers only he knew. I stood frozen, my breath caught halfway between a scream and a sob. The hand twitched, feeling its way forward like the blind antenna of an insect, pushing further into the world. Another crack split the floor, and a second hand burst through beside the first, clutching the boards with hideous strength. The wood moaned and snapped like ribs breaking under pressure. "They're coming through," the old woman wailed, her voice ragged. "The barrier is gone." The eldest elder suddenly slammed his hand down onto the table, his cloudy eyes burning with something fierce and desperate. "No. The barrier is not gone, not yet. They've found a way through him." His finger, gnarled and trembling, pointed straight at me. The air left my lungs in a single shuddering gasp. "Me? What do you mean me? I haven't done anything." The floorboards splintered wider. Dust filled the air as cracks spiderwebbed across the hall, each line glowing faintly, as though something beneath pulsed with its own sickly light. A smell rose from the gap, damp earth mixed with rot, a cloying stench that made bile surge in my throat. "You answered them," the broad-shouldered elder said, his voice sharp with fury. He pointed his trembling finger at me as if condemning me to death. "When you listened to their whispers. When you let their voices inside. You gave them purchase." The truth of it struck me with a force I couldn't deny. The motel door. My brother's voice. The aching temptation to just rest, to give in. I had listened. I had nearly believed. And that had been enough. The hands tore a hole wide enough for more of the creature to emerge. First came the head, if it could be called that. It had the vague outline of a human skull but stretched longer, narrower, with no eyes, only deep indentations where sockets should have been. Its mouth hung open as though unhinged, jaw trembling with silent laughter that I could feel more than hear. I stumbled back, my body screaming to run, but my legs rooted themselves to the spot. The elders pressed themselves against the far wall, faces twisted in horror. "Don't look at it," the old woman cried, covering her eyes with both hands. "They steal more when you look." But I couldn't stop. My gaze was trapped, locked to its hollow face as if magnetized. I swore I saw the shape of my brother's features flicker across that eyeless skull for the briefest heartbeat. His cheekbones, his grin, the curl of his hair, but then it warped away, replaced by another face I didn't recognize. Then another. A child's face. A woman's. Dozens, flashing like slideshow frames across its skin. The eldest staggered forward, his frail voice breaking into a shout. "They cannot pass fully without a vessel. That is what they want. That is why they are here for you." The creature's jaw stretched wider, wider, until the skin at the corners tore and sagged. From within, a sound emerged, a breath, ragged and low, like 1,000 voices inhaling at once. The candles flickered wildly, some snuffing out entirely, plunging half the hall into smothering black. Panic surged in me, raw and blinding. My body screamed for survival. I turned toward the door, intent on bolting into the night, bargain be damned. But the broad-shouldered elder caught me by the arm with surprising strength. His grip was iron, his face inches from mine, eyes blazing with desperation. "If you leave, they'll follow you out. Don't you understand? They'll use you as the door." I wrenched free, gasping. "Then what the hell do I do?" The eldest spoke again, his voice a rattling croak. "Fight it. Resist the pull. If you sleep, it will take you whole. If you face it," he faltered, trembling, his cloudy eyes darting to the creature dragging itself higher from the floor. "Perhaps you can deny it entry." The thing's torso emerged, emaciated ribs stretching against translucent flesh. It was so thin it looked hollow, yet every inch of it radiated strength. The air grew colder, biting against my skin. My thoughts grew sluggish, tangled, as though something were pressing against my skull from the inside, stroking the edges of my consciousness like a predator testing a cage. And then, it spoke. Not in whispers this time. Not in my brother's voice. But in mine. "You don't have to run anymore." The words rattled inside my head, but they came out of its gaping maw, lips forming syllables I had never seen a nightmare speak. My own voice echoed back at me, calm and reassuring. The world tilted. My knees weakened. I felt myself slipping, not into sleep exactly, but into something worse, something deeper. A drowning sensation, as if pulled into a sea of black water with no surface, no air. Hands grabbed me, dragging me back. The broad-shouldered elder clutched my arms, shaking me violently. "Stay awake," he roared. His spit struck my face, but I barely felt it. "Stay awake or we are all damned." The creature lunged then, clawed hands snapping forward through the floor, reaching for me. The creature's hands slammed against the floorboards, splinters spraying across the room like shrapnel. Its long fingers curled inward, dragging its body higher through the widening gap. The wood snapped under its weight, yet there was no blood, no breaking of bones, only that sickening glide, as though the world itself was making room for it. The elders cried out in unison, their voices sharp and brittle like glass. Some pressed themselves against the far wall, trembling, while others whispered feverishly under their breath, words too fast and garbled to understand. But none of them moved to fight. None stepped forward. They watched me instead, as though waiting for something inevitable to unfold. The broad-shouldered elder still clutched me, his nails digging into my arm hard enough to break skin. "Do not give it your eyes," he barked. "Do not give it your voice." But how could I resist? The thing was all I could see, all I could hear. Its head tilted unnaturally, the absence of eyes somehow more suffocating than the presence of them. And then, impossibly, I felt its gaze. It stared into me without eyes, without pupils, without sockets, straight through to the marrow of who I was. A pressure bloomed behind my temples, a pounding ache that deepened with every second. It wasn't just looking at me, it was inside me. My thoughts were no longer mine. Memories twisted and surfaced against my will. I saw Daniel, my brother, standing at the edge of the motel bed, smiling the way he had when we were kids, before the accident. His mouth moved, but the voice that came was wrong. "You let me die, James. You left me in the dark." The floor swayed beneath me. I staggered, clutching my head. No, that's not true. The memory shifted, my brother's hands slipping from mine in the water, the desperate thrashing, the choking cries. My lungs burned as if I were the one drowning all over again. The old woman's shrill voice cut through the hallucination like a knife. "It is not him. They steal what you fear most. They feed on your guilt." But the guilt was real. I had lived with it every day since that summer, since I was 14 and Daniel was 12, since I watched him vanish beneath the river's surface. And now the watcher had found it, peeled it open, made it bleed. The creature's mouth opened wide, wider, the skin splitting at the corners, and my brother's voice poured out, distorted and echoing. "You could have saved me. You chose not to. Why should you be allowed to wake while I sleep forever?" My knees buckled. My chest heaved. The edges of my vision collapsed inward, shadows tightening like a noose. I realized then what it was doing. It wasn't just trying to scare me. It was lulling me. The heaviness in my limbs, the irresistible pull at my eyes, the sweetness of surrender, it was sleep. The watcher was dragging me toward it like a lullaby whispered by something too ancient to resist. The broad-shouldered elder slapped me hard across the face. The sting jolted me back for a fraction of a second. "Stay with me," he roared. His breath reeked of stale coffee and desperation. "They'll kill us all if you fall." The creature's claw lashed outward, faster than my eyes could follow. It struck the elder in the chest, throwing him across the room with bone-snapping force. He crashed against the far wall and crumpled, coughing blood that shone black in the candlelight. I screamed, not in anger but in terror. Now there was nothing between me and it. The watcher's torso fully emerged from the hole, its body impossibly long, stretching upward until its head scraped the ceiling. Its skin was translucent, webbed with veins that pulsed faintly with blue light. Its mouth hung inches from my face, breath cold as winter graves. "Sleep," it whispered. My own voice again. Calm. Reassuring. A voice I might have trusted, if not for the abomination speaking it. The weight pressed harder against my skull. My knees buckled. My eyelids drooped. Images of a bed, soft, warm, inviting, flashed before my eyes. My mother's voice hummed the lullaby she used to sing when I was a child. Daniel's laughter rang somewhere far away, bright and pure. It felt so easy, so simple, to just surrender. To lay down and drift. The eldest elder's voice pierced through the fog. He shouted words in a language I didn't know, his tone raw, frantic, commanding. The air shimmered faintly, the hole in the floor twitching like a wound trying to close. The Watcher roared, not with sound, but with vibration that rattled my teeth and churned my stomach. "Resist it," the old man cried, his throat tearing on the syllables. "It cannot take what you do not give." But I was giving. Every second I stood there, every breath I took, I gave it my fear, my guilt, my weakness. And the more I fought, the stronger it seemed to grow. Then, in the depths of that struggle, I felt something else. A thread. Thin, fragile, but real. A voice, not the Watcher's, not the Elder's, but my own, buried deep. "It isn't him. It never was. It's only you, and the dark." I clenched my fists. My nails bit into my palms until blood welled up. The pain anchored me, sharpened me. I forced my eyes open wide and shouted, my voice raw, "You're not my brother. You're nothing." The Watcher recoiled, its eyeless face twisting into something like fury. The pressure behind my skull cracked, releasing like a dam bursting. The illusion of Daniel dissolved, leaving only that terrible, hollow face. The eldest elder bellowed another word, thrusting his frail arms outward. The hole in the floor slammed shut with a deafening crack. The Watcher screeched, a sound that wasn't sound at all but a tearing of reality itself. Its body dissolved into smoke, sucked downward into nothingness. In an instant, it was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the sound of my ragged breaths filled the hall. The broad-shouldered elder groaned from where he lay crumpled, his chest heaving shallowly. The old woman sobbed into her hands. The eldest elder stared at me, his cloudy eyes shining with something between awe and horror. His voice shook when he finally spoke. "You fought it, and lived. No one has ever resisted a Watcher once chosen." I staggered, my body trembling violently, my skin clammy with sweat. My voice cracked as I whispered, "What the hell does that mean?" The elder's lips tightened. "It means they will not stop. Not now. Not ever. Until they take you, or you destroy them." And then, with the faintest tremor of fear, he added, "Perhaps, you were never a stranger here at all." The silence after the Watcher's retreat was worse than the noise. It wasn't peace, it was absence, an emptiness that rang louder than screams. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch breath, my body trembling with exhaustion. The air still carried its stench, damp and metallic, like wet iron left to rust. Every shadow in the corners of the hall seemed thicker now, stretching and bending unnaturally, as if something had retreated only to wait. The eldest elder lowered himself back into his chair, his hands shaking so badly the candlelight quivered in their reflection. His cloudy eyes fixed on me with a mix of reverence and dread. "You should not have survived that," he rasped. "No outsider has ever resisted the pull of a Watcher once marked." I swayed on my feet, clutching the back of a chair to steady myself. My voice cracked with disbelief. I barely survived. I almost gave in. If it wasn't for, my words faltered. What had saved me? My own defiance? Or had the Watcher simply retreated because it wanted to? Why did it stop? The elder shook his head slowly, his lips pressed thin. Not stop. Withdraw. They do not waste strength when they know the feast is not ready. The old woman rocked gently on her knees, her sobbing reduced to shallow breaths. "It tasted him," she whispered. Her voice was faint, like a child muttering in the dark. "It knows him now. It will come again." The broad-shouldered elder staggered upright, his shirt torn and bloodied where the Watcher's claw had raked him. His face was pale, his jaw clenched with pain, but his eyes burned as he pointed at me. "He's the reason the barrier broke. He's the reason it got this far." His voice cracked into a shout. "We should have turned him away when he first drove in. We should have let the dark take him at the edge of town instead of damning us all." I recoiled, the accusation hitting harder than the Watcher's claws. I didn't ask for this. I snapped. I didn't even know this place existed until my gas ran out. You think I wanted any of this? But even as the words left me, a hollow doubt echoed inside. The road twisting back on itself, the inexplicable pull toward the town, the motel door whispering in my brother's voice, it hadn't been chance. It had been deliberate. Something had drawn me here. The eldest elder leaned forward, his bony fingers steepled. Tell me your name, traveler. The demand cut strange and sharp through the silence. My name suddenly felt like something fragile, dangerous to give. James, I said finally, my throat dry. James Carter. The elder's head lowered, his shoulders sagging as though under a weight far heavier than his frail body should bear. He whispered the name back, tasting it, turning it over. Carter. The old woman froze. Her rocking stopped. Her wide, watery eyes darted toward the elder, then back to me. No, she breathed. It can't be. The broad-shouldered man spat a fleck of blood onto the floor. Of course. Of course it would be a Carter. I stiffened. What are you talking about? The eldest elder looked at me, his expression dark, weary, unyielding. You are not here by accident, James Carter. This town was built on your family's sin. The room swam for a moment. My heart lurched, beating fast and shallow. That's impossible. My family's from Ohio. We've never even been here. The elder's voice deepened, the weight of his words heavy with conviction. 2 centuries ago, the first Carters came with the settlers. It was your bloodline that struck the bargain with the Watchers. It was your bloodline that promised no one would ever sleep again. And it is your bloodline that has carried the debt ever since. The words were knives. I shook my head violently. No. No, you're wrong. My family, we don't, my voice faltered. Memories of my mother's unease, the way she'd insisted on night lights in every room, the way my father drank himself into stupors instead of closing his eyes. My brother Daniel, restless even as a child, plagued by night terrors. My own sleeplessness after his death, as though my body had always known the danger of rest. The pieces didn't fit neatly, but they pressed against each other all the same. The broad-shouldered elder stepped closer, his bloodied chest rising and falling. The Watchers don't forget. They keep the ledger. Every Carter that's born is a reminder of the oath that chained us. And now they've dragged you back, like iron to a magnet. The old woman's lips trembled. The debt must be paid. It always circles back. I staggered back a step, my head spinning. You think I'm responsible for this? For them? I was just a kid when my brother drowned. I was just passing through when I came here. My voice cracked into a raw shout. This isn't my fault. The eldest elder's expression did not change. It does not matter if it is your fault. It only matters that it is your blood. My hands trembled. Rage and terror tangled together inside me until I could barely breathe. Then what do they want from me? To stay here forever? To keep your town awake until I die? The elder shook his head slowly. No. They want more than that. The old woman's voice cracked as she whispered, they want you to sleep. They want the bloodline back in their grasp. My stomach dropped, the words echoing through me like the toll of a bell. My eyelids felt suddenly heavier, the exhaustion of the past nights pressing down harder than ever. The Watcher's voice, my voice, whispered in memory, just close your eyes. I realized then, with a clarity that made my skin crawl, that the Watchers weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to claim me. To use me as the doorway. To rip open the last of the barrier and drag not just the town, but everything beyond, into their sleepless dark. The eldest elder met my gaze, his expression grim. You have a choice, James Carter. Stand with us, or surrender to them. But know this, the watchers will not stop. And if you fall, his voice cracked, the rest of the world will fall with you. The candlelight sputtered violently. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting into long, clawed shapes. Somewhere outside, the knocking began again. But this time, it was louder. It was everywhere. The pounding did not stop. It came from every wall, every window, every door in the town hall. It was as if the building itself had become a drum and the watchers the players, their rhythm slow, patient, methodical. Each knock carried weight, a deep vibration that sank into bone, echoing through my chest like a second heartbeat. The elders froze, their wrinkled faces pale and damp with sweat. The old woman began to rock again, her dry lips whispering words I could not catch, prayers swallowed by the steady thudding. "Stay away from the walls," the broad-shouldered elder barked. His voice was taut with panic, and the authority he had worn earlier was gone. Now he was as terrified as the rest. "Don't let them hear you breathe." I pressed my back against the central table, the wood trembling faintly beneath my hands. My pulse hammered so loudly I was sure it could be heard outside. The knocking grew sharper, more insistent, until glass panes rattled in their frames and dust sifted down from the rafters. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence was suffocating, heavier than the pounding had been. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask what had just happened, but a thin crack split the ceiling above us before the words could leave my lips. At first it was no wider than a hairline fracture, a delicate fissure in the plaster. But then it deepened, jagged and crooked, spreading like a vein of black lightning. The candle flames bent toward it, as though air itself was being drawn into the crack. The eldest elder's face collapsed into something worse than fear. Resignation. "It is thinning," he whispered. "The veil." A second crack spidered across the ceiling, meeting the first. Bits of plaster flaked away and drifted down like ash. When I tilted my head back, I thought, no, I knew that I saw something behind the broken ceiling. Not the night sky, not wooden beams, but something vast and shifting, a surface alive with crawling shadows. They moved in silence, rippling and bending, each shape straining against the cracks as if testing for weakness. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. "That's not possible," I muttered. My voice sounded hollow, useless. "Buildings don't just open into that." The broad-shouldered elder grabbed me by the collar, his bloodied grip hot and desperate. "This is your family's doing, Carter. Every crack, every shadow, this is the price of the bargain your ancestors made." His spit hit my cheek as he shouted. "They gave the watchers a door, and now you've come back to open it the rest of the way." The eldest elder raised a frail hand. "Enough." His voice, though weak, cut through the chaos like a blade. "Blame will not stop the unraveling." The broad-shouldered man's grip lingered on my collar before he shoved me away, his eyes wild with fury. "If he won't close it, then we'll feed him to it." My chest heaved. I staggered back a step, my arms trembling, the accusation sinking deep. My bloodline. My fault. My presence here wasn't random. And yet, standing in that shaking hall, staring at the ceiling that revealed a sky that wasn't a sky, I couldn't believe that the solution was as simple as feeding me to monsters. The old woman suddenly shrieked. Her head snapped toward the doors, her eyes wide, and she pointed a crooked finger. "They're inside." The heavy double doors at the far end began to bulge inward, the wood stretching unnaturally as if something pressed against it from the other side. Groaning filled the hall, deep and guttural, like a beast too large for the space it wanted to enter. The locks and chains strained, metal screeching. "We have to leave," one of the younger elders cried. He bolted toward a side door, but before he could reach it, a hand, long, pale, with fingers far too many, slid through the growing crack in the wood and grasped his face. His scream was muffled as the hand dragged him against the splintering door, then yanked him clean through as though the wood had melted. His cries cut off instantly. The other elders recoiled in horror. The broad-shouldered one cursed under his breath, dragging a heavy beam across the double doors as reinforcement. The eldest elder whispered something under his breath, his lips moving in an old tongue I didn't recognize. But his eyes never left me. "The town cannot hold much longer," he said. "The Watchers do not want us. They want you, Carter. And if you don't decide soon, they will take everything around you to force your hand." The knocking began again, but this time it wasn't on the doors or the windows. It was inside the walls. The sound came from every direction, beneath the floorboards, within the plaster, crawling closer, as though the building itself had been hollowed out and filled with unseen fists. I clutched my head, trying to think, trying to force some kind of plan through the terror. But all I could see were the cracks above, widening, the false sky bleeding open. A sliver of darkness dripped through, not liquid, not smoke, but something worse, something that seemed to drain the light out of the room wherever it touched. It fell onto the table in a single drop, and the wood blackened instantly, curling in on itself as though eaten from within. The old woman screamed and scrambled back. "It's breaking through. The seal is failing." And then I heard it. Not knocking. Not scratching. Not the dragging voice that had called to me before. This time, it was a lullaby. Soft, sweet, familiar. My mother's voice. Singing the song she used to hum when I was a child, when I had night terrors and couldn't sleep. A tune that wrapped around me like warm blankets and safe arms. I froze. The sound wasn't in the room, it was inside my head. The Watchers weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to soothe me. To make me give in willingly. The eldest elder's eyes widened as he saw my expression change. "Resist it, Carter. Do you hear me? Do not listen." But the cracks widened further. The lullaby grew louder. And my eyelids, traitorous, aching, unbearably heavy, began to sink. The lullaby threaded through the hall like smoke, curling around my thoughts until they no longer belonged entirely to me. My body trembled with exhaustion, yet for the first time since entering this cursed town, I felt something dangerously close to comfort. Each note resonated deep in my chest, stirring memories I had buried years ago, my mother's soft humming in the dead of night, the way she would stroke my hair when I woke up screaming from nightmares. I could almost smell her lavender perfume, feel the gentle weight of her hand against my forehead. It was more than memory. It was presence. But beneath the sweetness was something wrong, something off-key. Like honey stirred with poison, the lullaby carried dissonance, a vibration that didn't soothe but hollowed. Every time I inhaled, I swore I tasted rust. Every time I exhaled, I felt lighter, as though some piece of me slipped out with the breath and never returned. The old woman clutched her ears, rocking faster now. "Don't listen. Don't listen," she keened. Her voice was thin and brittle against the melody, like paper trying to smother fire. "It's not your mother, boy. It's them. It's them wearing her voice." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the lullaby wove into my veins, pulling me toward surrender with the ease of a tide claiming the shore. My eyelids sagged despite my efforts to hold them open, and each blink dragged longer, darker. The eldest elder struggled to his feet, his frail frame shaking. He hobbled toward me, grasping my shoulders with surprising strength. His breath was hot and sour against my face. "James Carter, hear me," he hissed. "The Watchers cannot force you to sleep. They can only invite. They need your consent, however fragile. That song is their hand extended. If you take it, if you close your eyes, the door will open, and all will be lost." His grip hurt, but it tethered me to the room, to the flickering candles and terrified eyes, to the world that still existed outside the lullaby. "Then what do I do?" I croaked. My throat was raw, as if I had been screaming though I hadn't. I can't shut it out. It's inside me. The elder's eyes, murky, cataract-clouded, glimmered with something sharper than fear. Blood bound this town. Blood must free it. There is only one way to sever the Carter line's bargain. His meaning struck me like cold iron. My stomach churned, my vision swaying. You're saying I have to die? The broad-shouldered elder, still pressing his weight against the barricaded door, barked a harsh laugh, bitter as bile. Better one Carter than all of us. You should have been dead the second you rolled into town. No! The word tore from me before I could think, raw and desperate. You don't know what they want. If they wanted me dead, they would have taken me already. They want more than that. They want me alive, sleeping. They want me to invite them in. The eldest elder's grip loosened, his expression unreadable. Then perhaps your death denies them the key they seek. The lullaby swelled, drowning out the words. My mother's voice, or the thing that wore it, rose in tenderness, filling every crevice of my mind. It's all right, Jamie. You don't have to fight anymore. Just close your eyes. Rest. I'll keep you safe. I'll be here when you wake. My breath hitched. My chest ached with longing. I wanted that more than anything, to believe her, to fall into her arms, to finally let the exhaustion consume me. For a fleeting second, I nearly did. My body swayed, and the edges of the hall blurred into soft darkness. But then Daniel's face flashed in my mind. My brother, waterlogged and pale, his lips blue as they dragged him from the river. His eyes half open, staring at nothing. The guilt that had eaten me alive for years surged up, cutting sharp against the lullaby. If this was my mother's voice, where had it been when Daniel needed saving? Where had it been when I screamed for help the night he died? No, I rasped. My voice shook, but it was mine. You're not her. The lullaby faltered. Just slightly, but enough. The sweetness soured, the rust taste thickened. The cracks above shivered, and through them, the shadows stirred faster, agitated. The old woman wailed with relief. He resists. He resists. The broad-shouldered elder cursed, sweat pouring down his face as the barricaded door buckled. Not enough. They're coming through anyway. The eldest elder's gaze never left mine. Then you must choose, Carter. If you will not give them your consent, then give us your sacrifice. Blood to close the breach. Yours, or all of ours. The weight of his words crushed the air from my lungs. Every path led to ruin, surrender to the lullaby and doom the world, or spill my own blood and maybe save this cursed town. But even as panic clawed at me, I saw a third path glimmering faintly in the darkness. Because the Watchers wanted me awake long enough to consent. They wanted me alive long enough to choose. And that meant, for now, they couldn't kill me outright. Which meant I had leverage. My voice shook, but I forced it out. Then maybe I can turn their own hunger against them. The elders stared at me as if I had spoken madness. And maybe I had. The lullaby stopped. The silence that followed was worse. From the cracks above, dozens of eyes opened at once, lids tearing back like wounds, pupils wide and glistening, all of them locked on me. And in perfect unison, a voice deeper than any human throat could make whispered, "Then play, Carter. Let's see how long you last." The silence stretched on until it became unbearable, the kind of silence that presses against the inside of your skull, amplifying the rush of blood in your ears, the hiss of your own breath, the frantic beating of your heart. The elders were statues around me, their faces drained, their eyes flicking from the ceiling to the doors to the windows as though expecting the next assault from all directions at once. The cracks in the plaster pulsed faintly, like veins alive with some black ichor. And above them, the eyes, impossible, endless, unblinking, watched. I swallowed hard, my throat raw, and forced my voice to steady though my knees shook. "You want me," I said, lifting my chin toward the cracks. Fine. But I'm not giving myself up for free. If I go on my terms. The elders stiffened. The old woman whimpered, clutching her rosary tighter. The broad-shouldered man spat blood and barked, "Are you mad? You don't bargain with them. You can't bargain with them." But the watchers responded. Not with sound this time, but with movement. The cracks deepened, widening into jagged lines that revealed more of that writhing sky beyond. The eyes leaned closer, pressing against the thin veil, and for a moment I swore I saw teeth, not in mouths, but scattered in the darkness, unmoored, grinning with hunger. A voice, collective and layered, seeped into the hall, vibrating the floorboards. "Speak, Carter. We listen." The eldest elder collapsed into his chair, his face ashen. His lips moved, whispering a prayer or perhaps a curse, but he didn't try to stop me. Maybe he knew it was too late for anything else. I took a shuddering breath. "If you want me so badly, if you've dragged me here, if you've made me your key, then you can wait. Because I'm not ready to give myself to you. Not yet. And as long as I resist, you can't force it." The air thickened, pressing against my chest. My vision blurred at the edges. The watcher's gaze sharpened, piercing, as though they could strip the skin from my soul. "You think you hold power," the voice hissed, not angry, but amused. "You think survival is strength. We do not hunger for your life. We hunger for your sleep. And every second you resist, you weaken. Every moment you refuse us, we taste more of your mind." The lullaby began again, softer now, weaving through the cracks like smoke, curling into my ears, my veins. My body ached with exhaustion, my bones screaming for rest. But I clenched my fists and spat into the shadows. Then starve. The hall shuddered violently, dust raining down from the rafters. The doors rattled as unseen fists pounded harder, faster, furious. The old woman shrieked and pressed her hands to her ears. The broad-shouldered elder threw himself against the barricade, his voice breaking. "You've doomed us all, Carter. They'll tear this town apart to spite you." But even as the walls shook, even as the cracks yawned wider, I felt it, hesitation. The watchers hadn't expected defiance. No one had ever refused this long. No one had dared to mock their hunger. The eldest elder's voice, trembling but clear, broke through the chaos. "He's right." His clouded eyes glistened. "As long as he resists, they cannot fully cross. They are bound by the bargain. They must be invited. They must be accepted." The broad-shouldered man snarled. "And what happens when he collapses from exhaustion? What happens when he slips? Then they'll have him anyway, and the rest of us too." His words cut deep, because they were true. My body was already betraying me, every muscle screaming, every nerve aflame. I was running on fumes, and the watchers knew it. They could wait. They had all the time in the world. The lullaby shifted, weaving into something else, Daniel's voice. My brother's voice, choked with water, begging. "Jamie, why didn't you save me?" The sound gutted me, ripping through scar tissue I had built for years. My knees buckled, and I nearly collapsed. The memories surged, the river, the current, his hands slipping from mine. My fault. Always my fault. The eldest elder gripped my arm, steadying me with surprising strength. "Do not listen. Do not give them the crack they need." His voice was low, urgent. "They will use every grief you carry, every shame you've buried. They will dress it in the faces of the dead. But it is only them. Always them." The cracks pulsed, bleeding more darkness into the room. The air reeked of iron and wet soil. The shadows along the walls stretched, forming long-fingered hands that clawed toward us, though they never quite touched. Not yet. I forced my eyes up, glaring into that impossible sky. My voice was hoarse, trembling, but I let the fury in me burn hotter than the fear. If you want me so badly, then you'll have to earn me. You'll have to watch me resist, second after second, minute after minute, until you're the ones who can't stand it anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the eyes blinked, one after another, like a ripple across the void. Slowly, the voice returned, deeper, colder, a whisper that was also a growl. Then we will take the town instead. We will break it, piece by piece, until you beg us to stop. And as if on command, screams erupted outside, dozens, maybe hundreds. The town itself had awakened to terror. The watchers no longer tapped politely at doors. They were walking the streets. The elders turned toward the windows, their faces stricken. The broad-shouldered man slammed his fists against the table. "Do you hear that, Carter? Your defiance just damned every last soul out there." I wanted to argue, to deny it, but the screams rose higher, wailing through the sleepless night. And in my chest, a sickening truth unfurled. The watchers couldn't take me. So they would take everyone else instead. The sound of screaming spread through the town like fire catching dry timber. It wasn't distant, it was close, immediate, crawling in through the cracks of the boarded windows and echoing down the trembling beams of the hall. High-pitched cries of children tangled with the guttural roars of men, the shrill keening of women, and beneath it all was a deeper note, an animal-like bellow that no human throat could ever produce. It was a symphony of despair, orchestrated with perfect cruelty. I staggered toward the nearest window, pressing my face against the slats between the nailed boards. What I saw nearly tore the breath from my lungs. The streets were alive, not with people, but with things. Shadows peeled away from lampposts and doorframes, stretching tall and thin, their bodies bending and warping like reflections in rippling water. Faces bloomed and dissolved across their surfaces, mouths opening too wide, eyes weeping tar. They swarmed the houses, slipping through cracks under doors, seeping into chimneys, pressing their hands against glass until it shattered inward. The townsfolk fought. I saw men with shotguns blast at shadows that only staggered before reforming, women swinging kitchen knives at nothing and everything, children clinging to their mothers while being dragged backward by hands that appeared from under the earth itself. Some resisted, some fled, but the result was the same. One by one, they were overtaken. I realized, with sick clarity, what the watchers meant by taking the town. They weren't killing anyone. They were forcing them awake. Forcing them into that same twilight state I had tasted in the motel, where sleep hovered but never arrived, where whispers never ceased, where reality itself stretched and cracked. Their bodies remained, but their eyes were open too wide, glassy and bloodshot, their mouths moving silently in mimicry of the lullaby that still hummed in my veins. The broad-shouldered elder saw it too. He slammed his fists against the barricaded door, his face twisted with rage. "Look at them. Look at what your defiance brought on us." I whipped around, fury igniting in my chest. "This isn't because of me. This is because of you, because of the bargain you let my ancestors make, because you've kept this curse alive instead of facing it. Don't lay this all on me." The old woman wailed, rocking harder, tears streaking her wrinkled cheeks. "It was always going to spread. Always. The Carter blood is the tether. The Carter blood is the gate." The watchers only waited until the line returned. Her words struck like cold nails hammered into my spine. Was I the trigger? Was this massacre inevitable the second I crossed the border? The lullaby swelled louder, drowning thought, drowning reason. My mother's voice shifted seamlessly into Daniel's, then into my father's, then back again, every note designed to gut me. "They suffer because of you, Jamie. You could stop this. One breath, one surrender, and it ends. Just close your eyes. Just rest. Let us carry the weight for you." I clutched my skull, nails digging into my scalp, trying to block it out, but the voices filled the marrow of my bones. I staggered, dropping to my knees, and for a terrifying moment the idea seemed merciful. If my surrender spared the town, wasn't that better than watching them unravel? Wasn't my life worth less than hundreds of others? The eldest elder limped to my side, his hand pressing hard against my shoulder. His voice cracked but carried steel. Do not believe them. The Watchers do not bargain in good faith. If you give in, they will not spare the town, they will consume it, and then the world beyond. You are not the sacrifice they seek. You are the doorway. The truth of it rang in me, undeniable. The Watchers didn't want an end, they wanted a beginning. And I was the key. I forced myself to my feet, shoving the lullaby back into the corner of my mind where it pulsed like a festering wound. My vision swam, but I clung to rage, to defiance, because they couldn't soothe rage away. Rage burned too hot to lull. Through the window, I saw one of the townsfolk, a young boy, maybe 12, break free of his mother's grasp and run into the street. A Watcher shadow wrapped around him instantly, its long fingers stroking his face. His eyes rolled back, his body twitching violently, and then he went still. His eyes opened wide, glowing faintly, and his mouth curved into a smile that wasn't his. He turned, and his voice, his child's voice, lifted to join the lullaby. That broke me. I spun back to the elders, my voice raw, trembling with both fury and desperation. If standing still means the Watchers win, then we stop standing still. We fight. Not with barricades. Not with prayers. We fight them. The broad-shouldered man sneered, his hands bloody from gripping the barricade. You think you can fight shadows? You think you can punch the dark? Maybe not, I snapped. But they want me too badly to let me die. That's the only advantage we've got. So we use it. We make me the bait, the lure. We drag them into a place where we can burn them, bind them, whatever it takes. You've lived under this curse for generations, you must know something that can hurt them. The elders exchanged looks, torn between terror and the faint flicker of hope. The old woman rocked slower now, her lips trembling as she whispered, there is one way. One place. But it requires blood. The eldest elder's voice lowered, grave and final. The church. Beneath its altar lies the site of the original covenant. The soil there still remembers. If the Carter blood is spilled upon it, the bond may be severed, or it may be sealed forever. The lullaby quieted. The eyes above leaned closer, listening. My heart hammered, the weight of choice pressing down until I could hardly breathe. The church. My blood. Sever or seal. Salvation or damnation. And outside, the screams continued, a chorus urging me toward the inevitable. The barricade splintered behind us as we pushed into the night, the weight of the elders' warnings thick in my chest. The streets were no longer streets, they were corridors in a waking nightmare. Lamps hissed and buzzed overhead, spilling too much light, bleaching every surface until it looked pale and sickly. Shadows pooled unnaturally, writhing against the corners of buildings as if eager to crawl free. The air vibrated with the lullaby, no longer confined to whispers in my head but sung aloud by dozens of throats, a choir of stolen voices rising into the poisoned sky. We moved quickly, a ragged procession of maybe a dozen townsfolk who had survived the first wave. Their eyes were wide, their faces hollow, and I could feel their hatred on my back. To them, I was the reason their children were singing with glassy eyes, the reason their neighbors had been dragged into the dark. They were half right. But they also knew I was their only chance now. The broad-shouldered elder carried an axe, his knuckles white around the handle. The old woman clutched a bundle of herbs and twine, muttering in a language I didn't recognize. The eldest elder, Harlan, I finally learned, leaned on a cane carved with symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. And me? I had nothing but my body, my blood, and a curse I barely understood. We kept low, skirting along storefronts where mannequins twitched in their glass cages, their painted smiles widening as we passed. One turned its head, following me with dead plastic eyes. Its jaw cracked open slowly, impossibly wide, and in my mother's voice it crooned, "Home, Jamie. Don't you miss home?" I nearly stumbled, bile rising in my throat. The broad-shouldered man shoved me forward, his whisper harsh. "Don't listen. Don't look too long. That's how they take you." But how could I not look? Every corner, every window, every doorway held something familiar twisted wrong. A dog I'd once owned limped out of an alley, its body half decayed, tail wagging in recognition. A teacher from my childhood stood under a flickering lamp, her smile kind, until her neck bent backward with a sickening snap and her voice joined the chorus. Faces from my past emerged and dissolved, all calling my name, all offering the comfort of sleep if I would just let go. The lullaby thickened, pressing against my skull, seeping through my teeth and gums until it felt like my own mouth wanted to sing. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste iron, grounding myself in pain. We ducked into a narrow alley, the walls sweating with moisture that smelled of rot. Somewhere overhead, a shadow uncoiled itself from a rooftop and followed, its limbs stretching long enough to scrape both walls as it crawled after us. I could feel its hunger, directed not at the group, but at me. "Faster," Harlan rasped. "They know where we're going." At the alley's end, the church rose above the town like a skeletal monument. Its white paint had long since peeled, leaving gray boards beneath, but the steeple still pointed defiantly at the sky. Every window blazed with light, too bright, like eyes thrown open against the dark. The bells in the tower clanged, though no rope swung them, and each toll reverberated in my bones, shaking me to the marrow. We broke from the alley and sprinted across the open square. The ground seemed to ripple beneath us, hands reaching out from the cracks in the pavement to clutch at our ankles. One man screamed as fingers wrapped around his leg, dragging him down into the earth. The others didn't stop. Neither did I. His cries cut off in an instant, leaving only the lullaby to fill the space. As we neared the church steps, the watchers showed their teeth. They poured from the surrounding buildings, tall and thin, their faces shifting between strangers and family, their voices harmonizing in that sick lullaby. Some moved like liquid, slithering across the cobblestones. Others walked with broken, jerking motions, heads twitching, eyes rolling. And at the front of them, leading the march, was Daniel. He looked exactly as he had before the crash, same messy hair, same crooked grin, but his eyes were wrong. Too wide, too dark, reflecting nothing of the brother I remembered. He held his arms out, beckoning me like he had when we were children sneaking out of the house at night. "Jamie," he called, his voice rich with warmth that almost broke me. "You don't have to fight this. You don't have to carry it alone. Come with me. We'll never be apart again." I froze, my legs locking. It was Daniel. It was him. My heart screamed to believe it, to run to him, to let everything in his arms. The others hissed at me to move, but I couldn't. Then Harlan's cane cracked against the back of my knee, knocking me forward. I collapsed on the steps, gasping, and the spell broke. I looked up again, and Daniel's grin had split ear to ear, stretching until his jaw nearly unhinged. A black tongue uncoiled, tasting the air. His voice dropped into a guttural growl. "So close, little door. So very close." The townsfolk dragged me through the church doors, slamming them shut just as the watchers surged forward, clawing and howling against the wood. The old woman began to chant, scattering herbs along the threshold, her voice steady even as the walls shook with the force of their assault. Inside, the church was wrong. The pews were warped, too long, stretching into shadows that didn't belong. The altar glowed faintly, the wood wet with something that looked like blood. The air smelled of iron and old soil, and beneath the floorboards, I felt a pulse, slow, steady, like the heartbeat of something buried alive. Harlan's eyes locked on mine. "It has to be now. The bond was made here, and here it can be broken. But only your blood can call it. The lullaby grew louder outside, dozens of stolen voices battering the walls, rattling the stained glass. The watchers would be inside soon. My blood was the key. My blood was the risk. Sever or seal. My hands shook as I reached for the knife. Harlan pressed into them. The metal was cold, too heavy, humming faintly as if eager to taste me. The altar pulsed again, waiting. And the watchers began to sing in perfect unison, "Sleep, Jamie, sleep." The knife trembled in my grip, my reflection bent and warped across its polished steel. Around me, the church groaned like a ship on the verge of sinking, its walls straining against the onslaught of the watchers outside. The lullaby pressed harder, 1,000 stolen voices layering on top of one another until the words blurred, until they weren't even words anymore but a vibration that threatened to rattle my skull apart. My skin prickled, my bones ached, and my vision swam as though the air itself had turned heavy and liquid. The altar waited. Its surface pulsed faintly, veins of red glowing just beneath the wood, as if it were not carved timber at all but living flesh pretending to be holy. Each pulse echoed with my heartbeat, sinking with it, pulling me closer. I raised the knife, and in that moment I felt every eye in the church, human and not, lock onto me. The survivors held their breath. Harlan clutched his cane with white-knuckled hands, his lips moving silently in some ancient prayer. The old woman rocked, her chant growing faster, more desperate, the herbs smoking in her palms. The broad-shouldered man leaned forward, his face pale, sweat pouring down his temple. And beyond the walls, pressed against the glass and the wood and the stone, the watchers stood still, silent now, listening, waiting. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I saw my family. My mother's warm smile as she tucked me into bed. My father's stern face softening when he thought no one was looking. My brother Daniel, laughing as he shoved me into the lake on a hot July day. I wanted them back more than I wanted anything. I wanted them back so badly it hurt. And that was exactly what the watchers wanted me to feel. With a single, sharp movement, I dragged the blade across my palm. Fire lanced through my nerves, blood welling instantly, hot and sticky. It dripped down my wrist, fell in fat red drops onto the altar, and the wood hissed as though I had dropped acid onto its surface. The glow flared, brighter, spreading out like cracks in a dam, racing across the boards and up the walls of the church. The entire building shuddered. And then came the voices. Not the lullaby. Not the watchers. Not even the elders. These voices came from beneath. They roared up through the altar, through the earth, through the marrow of the world itself. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Layered together, screaming, whispering, crying, laughing. The sound was unbearable, but woven into it, I could pick out words. Ancient words. Old words. And then, English. We remember. The altar buckled, splitting open, revealing not stone beneath but soil blacker than tar. My blood soaked into it greedily, sucked downward as though the ground itself were thirsty. The smell of iron filled the church, mingling with the scent of wet earth and smoke. Harlan staggered back, his face ashen. This isn't right. This isn't how it should be. The old woman's chanting faltered, her voice breaking. She stared at me with eyes full of horror. The covenant isn't breaking, it's waking. The broad-shouldered man swore and lifted his axe as if he could chop the altar shut, but the soil beneath writhed like something alive, shifting, breathing. Shapes moved in it, pressed against it, faces stretching up from below, mouths open in silent screams. My blood continued to flow, feeding them, and I couldn't stop it. The knife clattered from my hand, useless. The watchers outside erupted into song, louder than ever, triumphant, exultant. They slammed against the church, and the windows shattered inward, raining glass. Their voices wrapped around the ancient chorus rising from below, and for the first time, they harmonized. And then I saw it, the memory. Not mine, but the memory of the land itself. The church dissolved around me, replaced by a field under a black sky. A crowd of people stood in a circle, torches burning in their hands. At the center, kneeling, was a man whose face mirrored my own. His wrists were bound, his head bowed, his lips moving in prayer. He was the first Carter, the one who had made the covenant. Around him, figures stood cloaked in shadow, their bodies too long, their faces shifting like oil across water. The villagers chanted, not in defiance, but in worship. And when the knife fell, cutting deep into the man's chest, his blood poured onto the soil, and the ground drank it gladly. The watchers did not take him. They welcomed him. He was not their victim. He was their bridge. I staggered back into the present, the vision leaving me gasping, sweat soaking my shirt. The truth burned itself into my brain. The Carters hadn't cursed the town to protect themselves. They had bound themselves to the watchers willingly, feeding their blood generation after generation to keep the gateway open. And I wasn't just some random descendant unlucky enough to stumble here. I was the last Carter. The final piece. The altar split wider, the soil yawning open, and something vast and ancient stirred beneath, stretching toward the light of my blood. And above me, pressed against the ceiling of the church, the watchers leaned in closer, their eyes gleaming, their mouths moving in perfect unison as they whispered, almost tenderly, "Welcome home." The church shook as though it were no longer a building but a living thing writhing in agony. The altar had split wide, a wound in the earth itself, and from that wound seeped a heat like breath, foul and damp. My blood continued to drip, every drop swallowed eagerly by the soil that pulsed like a heart. I staggered backward, clutching my palm, but the flow didn't stop. It wouldn't stop. The bond had been made, and I could feel it pulling more out of me than I was giving, a siphon deep in my veins that no cloth could staunch. The elders reacted in panic. Harlan pounded the floor with his cane, chanting a counterprayer that cracked and broke under the weight of the voices rising from the pit. The old woman shrieked, tearing herbs from her pouch and throwing them onto the soil, but they withered to dust before they landed. The broad-shouldered man lifted his axe and swung, splitting the altar clean through, but instead of breaking it, the strike only widened the opening, the soil collapsing inward like quicksand. From below, something vast and unseen groaned, a sound that rattled the boards, shook the windows, and pierced every bone in my body. The watchers outside had stopped hammering at the doors. They didn't need to anymore. They stood in rows beyond the shattered glass, their tall bodies swaying like reeds, their faces melting into one another in grotesque rhythms. They were waiting, humming, their lullaby low now, reverent, like a hymn. And I understood why. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't about keeping a town awake to stave off some curse. It was about opening a door. My ancestor, the first Carter, hadn't been a victim. He had been the offering. The bridge. He had carved his blood into the soil, and the watchers had stepped forward to claim it, to keep the gateway ajar. Every generation since had fed it, knowingly or not. The town had not been guarding against the dark, it had been feeding it. The truth crashed into me with a violence I could barely stand. I wasn't the last Carter by accident. I was the final meal. The one who would give everything, all of it, to rip the gate wide open once and for all. The old woman fell to her knees, clawing at her face, rocking back and forth as she wailed, "We've kept them at bay for centuries. We've fed the edges, but never the core. You've given them the core. You've given them the heart." Harlan's voice was harsh, ragged, desperate. "Not yet. Not all. The bond can still be severed." He turned to me, his eyes blazing. "It must be done with choice. With sacrifice. If you cut it willingly, if you give your life to close the wound, the Carters end with you, and the watchers starve." His words twisted my gut. Sever the bond. With my life. It wasn't just about spilling blood, it was about ending my line forever. The Carters had sustained this horror for centuries, and the only way to seal the gate was to burn the root. To burn me. The broad-shouldered man spat on the floor. Do it. Do it now, before the whole town is taken. He raised the axe again, gripping it like he was ready to do it for me. If you don't, I'll put you down myself. The watchers pressed closer to the windows, their faces smiling wide. And through the crack in the earth, something larger stirred. I felt its hunger, its patience, its certainty. The watchers weren't gods. They were keepers. They were servants of something far older, far hungrier. A thing that slept beneath the soil, waiting for the door to open wide enough to crawl through. I staggered to the altar, staring down into the pit. The soil was moving now, churning, bubbling like tar. Shapes swam in it, faces screaming, arms reaching, entire bodies trapped just below the surface. The Carter blood hadn't just fed the watchers. It had trapped the sacrifices here, tethered forever in half-sleep, their souls caught between worlds. And if I joined them, I would be nothing more than another voice in the chorus. The lullaby surged, every stolen throat pressed against the glass, singing with rapture. I heard Daniel's voice clearest of all, sweet and warm, cutting straight to the boy I had once been. Don't fight it, Jamie. You'll never be alone again. We'll be together. Forever. Tears burned in my eyes. My heart screamed yes, begged for release, begged for the ache of loneliness to end. But something colder, sharper cut through it, rage. Not at Daniel, but at the thing that wore his voice like a mask. At the watchers who had stolen my family, at the Carters who had bound me to this fate, at the ancient hunger gnawing its way upward through the soil. I pressed my bleeding hand flat against the altar, the blood sizzling where it touched the wood. The wound widened beneath me, soil falling away, the church groaning louder. My knees buckled as the siphon pulled harder, demanding more. Harlan's voice cracked through the noise. Choose, boy. Now. I looked at him, at the terrified survivors, at the watchers pressed like glassy-eyed children against the windows. And then I looked down into the soil, into the endless black beneath, and felt it stir again, something bigger than the town, bigger than the watchers, bigger than me. The choice was clear. But what it would cost, I wasn't sure I was ready to pay. I raised the knife again, my blood dripping faster, my body shaking. And the ground beneath the church whispered with one thunderous voice that split the air like a storm. Open. The earth beneath the church did not simply shake, it breathed. The boards trembled under my boots as though I were standing atop the chest of some giant buried alive, its ribcage straining upward with each heaving inhale. The pit yawned wider, swallowing pews whole, the altar splitting down the center like cracked bone. The air thickened, hot and wet, stinking of rot and copper. My blood still flowed into it, each drop swallowed with a hunger that made the soil ripple like water catching rain. And then the voice came again. Not from outside, not from the watchers pressed to the shattered windows, not from the lullaby that still hummed like static in the rafters. This voice came from below, immense, ancient, not spoken into air but directly into the marrow of my bones. Open. The word was not a request. It was a command. The soil pulsed with it, my own blood answering, my veins tightening as if they were strings being tuned. I staggered back, clutching my hand to my chest, but the connection only grew stronger. I could feel the thing below inside me now, breathing with me, moving with me. It wasn't just waiting for the gate to open, it was already reaching through. The survivors behind me gasped and cried out. One woman dropped to her knees, hands clasped in prayer, begging for mercy. The broad-shouldered man cursed, brandishing his axe at the pit as though muscle alone could hold back eternity. The old woman rocked faster, shrieking broken chants, herbs scattering like brittle leaves. But it was Harlan's face that struck me most, ashen, hollow, his eyes burning with the terrible recognition of a man who had studied the curse his whole life and finally understood its full scope. This isn't the watchers, he rasped. They're only the hands. The eyes. The servants. What sleeps beneath? His voice cracked, his cane clattering to the floor as he slumped against the wall. What sleeps beneath is older than the town. Older than us all. I staggered to the edge of the pit despite myself, peering into the churning black soil. It wasn't just soil anymore. The more I stared, the more it shifted, the more it shaped itself into faces. Thousands of them, half-formed, pressed upward as though drowning beneath ice. Their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide and pleading. I saw my mother. My father. Daniel. Their faces rose and dissolved, only to return again, mouths forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. They weren't calling me down. They were warning me away. But the thing below them pressed harder, and when it spoke again, it didn't use a single word. It used every voice I'd ever loved. My mother's tenderness, Daniel's laugh, my father's stern command. They all layered together into one chorus that wrapped around me like a noose. You are the last. The blood ends with you. Open, and they will all return. Every face, every voice, every life lost. No more loneliness, Jamie. No more nights afraid. Just one breath, and all you love will live again. Tears blurred my vision. My chest convulsed with sobs I hadn't known were still inside me. Because for one terrible heartbeat, I wanted it. God, I wanted it. To see them again, to hear them, to undo the accident, to have my family whole. It didn't matter if it was an illusion, if I believed, then it would be real enough. But Harlan's voice cut through my haze like a blade. It lies. Do you hear me, boy? It lies. It offers what it cannot give. Those souls you see are not waiting to be freed, they're caught, stolen, fed into its maw. If you open the gate, you will not bring them back, you will unbind it. And then there will be no world left to hold them. His words struck, but the temptation lingered. The soil bubbled violently, and something vast pressed closer to the surface. I saw it, not in full, but in fragments, an arm as long as the church itself, skin stretched too tight over bone, fingers like roots clawing upward. The watchers outside pressed their palms to the windows, their eyes rolling back in ecstasy, their mouths mouthing the same word again and again, though no sound carried, open. 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 The broad-shouldered man lunged at me, fury blazing. Do it, Carter. If it takes you to seal it, then bleed. Spill it all now before it's too late. His axe swung close, nicking my shoulder, and I stumbled back toward the pit. For a heartbeat I nearly lost my footing. The soil reached up, tendrils wrapping around my boots, eager, pulling. I tore free, chest heaving, and screamed at them all, "You think it's that simple? You think one drop of blood closes this? You've been feeding it for centuries. You've been keeping it alive." The old woman collapsed, clawing at her face, shrieking, "We were told it kept it sleeping. We were told," but her voice cracked into laughter, hysterical, broken. She knew the truth now. They all did. The pit glowed red, brighter, hotter. The faces beneath screamed louder. The giant arm pressed harder against the soil, straining to break through. And then the voice spoke one last time, so loud it shook the timbers of the church and rattled the very sky. "Open me, and the world is yours." The knife was still in my hand, slick with my blood. The altar pulsed like a heart beneath me. The watchers pressed closer to the windows, smiling, waiting. And I realized the choice wasn't just mine anymore. If I faltered, if I hesitated, the town would choose for me. They would cut me down and pour me into the wound themselves. The pit buckled, the earth tearing wider. And I knew that within moments, the thing below would not wait for my choice. I had seconds to act. Seconds to decide whether to bleed myself dry to starve it, or gamble that there was another way, something beyond what the elders believed, something hidden in the very lies the watchers had spun. My hand tightened on the knife. My chest burned with rage and grief. and the earth below cracked open like a mouth, ready to swallow me whole. The altar exploded into light the moment I stepped closer, the soil below squirming like it had a pulse of its own. My knees buckled under the force, but some instinct kept me upright, knife gripped like a lifeline. The church dissolved around me, or maybe I was dissolving into it. The walls peeled away, the ceiling stretched into a black sky swirling with impossible stars, and the floor rippled beneath my feet as though I were walking on water made of blood and shadow. The watchers outside became nothing more than pinpricks of pale light, distant and impatient, their whispers now swallowed by the roar rising from beneath me. The pit widened. The earth below opened fully, revealing a mass of darkness so vast it defied comprehension. It was alive. Not simply animate, but conscious. Its surface shifted constantly, covered in writhing faces, limbs, and eyes, all pressed upward, struggling, twisting. Some were human. Some were not. And at its center, coiled in impossible geometry, was its face. It wasn't a face in the normal sense. It was every face that had ever existed and yet none at all. Mouths open where eyes should be. Eyes bloomed across cheeks and foreheads. Skin bubbled and tore to reveal teeth and bone beneath. It looked directly at me, if look could even describe it, and in that gaze I felt every life it had ever touched, every soul bound to the watchers, every moment of suffering, every whisper of longing and fear. And it spoke, not in words, but in sensation, 1,000 simultaneous emotions cascading through me like a flood. Jamie Carter. You have the choice. Open, or end. Open, and the world is yours. End, and the world ceases to be. But one path feeds me. One path starves me. One path consumes all. I staggered back, trembling, blood from my palm dripping onto the shifting soil. The knife clattered against the altar, useless. I wanted to scream, but the sound was stolen, absorbed into the roar of the thing below. My heart felt like it was being crushed, every beat a hammer against bone, every breath a struggle against some unseen force pressing down. The watchers outside pressed their faces against the remnants of the windows, silent now, watching. They weren't the threat. They were merely the witnesses. The ancient thing beneath, the core, the true hunger, was what waited. And in its presence, I felt the full weight of the covenant, centuries of Carters feeding generations of watchers, keeping the gateway alive, keeping the darkness at bay by keeping it awake, trapped, but never broken. And then I understood. The choice wasn't simply to bleed myself dry or let the darkness spread. The choice was whether to end the line of the Carters completely, to sacrifice myself so that the gate could close, or to open it fully, unleash the being, and risk everything, perhaps even the world. I fell to my knees, gripping the altar, feeling my blood puddle beneath me. Faces pressed upward from the soil, mouths forming silent pleas. Daniel's face emerged, smiling warmly, beckoning me. My mother, my father, cousins long dead, ancestors whose names I had never known, they all whispered for me to join them, to end the pain, to give in. But the thing beneath, its presence, its consciousness, made one truth unbearably clear: it would never stop. If I gave in, I would feed it. If I resisted, it would consume me anyway, but perhaps I could starve it, maybe, just maybe, deny it the gateway and keep it in prison forever. The air vibrated with anticipation. The watchers' faces blurred against the edges of the black sky, waiting. The pit pulsed, hungry, patient. And the blood in my palm burned hotter than fire, as if it knew that my next movement would decide everything. I raised the knife once more, hands shaking uncontrollably, and in that moment, the world itself seemed to tilt. The voices, Daniel, my parents, all of them, screamed both in joy and terror. The faces beneath the soil pressed harder, limbs writhing, eyes widening. The watchers pressed closer to the threshold of the church, their silent presence a reminder of what had been built over centuries. And then the darkness beneath the altar split wider, forming not just a face but a mouth, an endless maw filled with teeth that curved like roots, lined with eyes that followed me. It whispered into my very bones, promising both release and annihilation. The choice is yours, Jamie Carter. Open, and know power beyond your imagination. Close, and know nothing. But once chosen, there is no undoing. I staggered forward, knife clutched, blood dripping onto the soil, my vision swimming. Sweat stung my eyes, and I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my skull like the tolling of a death bell. My ancestors' mistakes, my family's legacy, the suffering of the town, they all pressed down on me, heavy as stone. And in that unbearable, suffocating instant, I realized that the next step would determine the fate of every soul tied to the gateway, every life in the town, and perhaps the entire world beyond. The maw opened wider. The soil churned. The watchers pressed against the edges. And I took a trembling breath, raising the knife above the pulsing altar. The choice had come. I stood there, knife trembling in my hand, blood slicking the wood beneath me, the pulse of the altar sinking with the pounding in my chest. Every instinct screamed both ways, open, and no power beyond imagination, close, and erase everything you love from existence. The voices, Daniel's laughter, my mother's warmth, my father's reproach, all collided inside me like a storm. My knees buckled beneath the weight of centuries of suffering, my body screaming for release, my mind clawing at logic that would not come. The soil below churned violently, splashing black liquid upward as the faces pressed against one another, mouths stretching, eyes pleading, arms reaching. The watchers outside tilted closer to the broken windows, silent now, their elongated forms swaying in anticipation. Their whispers had stopped. Even the lullaby that had haunted me for so long, every note, every stolen voice, had fallen into a tense silence, as if the entire town held its breath. Harlan's hand grasped my shoulder with surprising strength. Jamie, you understand, don't you? There is no in-between. You cannot tiptoe around it. One step forward, or one step into the abyss. His eyes were wild with fear and hope all at once. The elders lied in their way, they didn't know the whole truth. The blood doesn't simply seal. It chooses. If you sever it, it will rage, but the watchers starve. If you open it, you become its gatekeeper. The thought was unbearable. To open it meant power, yes, but at what cost? The faces pressed upward in the soil were no longer pleading, they were screaming, violent, hungry, demanding. Their mouths moved in impossible shapes, but the sound I felt in my chest was raw, physical, like fire and ice at once. And the thing itself, massive, unseen, impossible, waited beneath it all, coiled and patient, aware of my hesitation. I thought of Daniel, smiling, beckoning me, promising warmth and reunion. I thought of my mother's arms, my father's softening eyes. I thought of the town, the lives of the innocents caught in centuries of terror. I thought of myself, trembling, bleeding, and yet tethered to this impossibility. And then the knife moved of its own accord. I don't know if it was my hand, or the blood, or the legacy of the Carters guiding it, but it rose above the altar, steel catching the dim light that flickered from the pulsing soil. My other hand pressed flat to the black earth, feeling its pulse against my palm, sensing the hunger, feeling it inside me, probing, testing. And I made my choice. I cut deeper, letting the blood flow freely onto the altar, onto the soil, onto the heartbeat beneath. Pain shot through me like lightning, searing my nerves, but I did not flinch. I closed my eyes, focusing on the one thing I had, control over what little remained of my own will. The earth quaked violently, the faces shrieking louder than I had ever imagined, the watchers outside lifting their arms, their bodies swaying in anticipation, their eyes gleaming. And then, slowly, impossibly, it began. The blood sank into the soil, and the soil began to shrink. The faces twisted in final screams, the arms clawed upward for one last grasp, and the immense maw beneath me drew tight, as though swallowing itself. The watchers pressed against the windows with sudden force, their mouths opening in silent, agonized cries, but then, one by one, they recoiled, swaying back into shadows as the light in their eyes dimmed. The church groaned like an old, collapsing ship, but the black soil continued to shrink, the pulse slowing, the vastness beneath me retreating into nothing. The faces melted together, forming a single, final image for a heartbeat, Daniel, smiling, reaching out, then dissolving into darkness. I staggered back, knees hitting the altar, gasping for air as my blood dripped into the receding pit. And then it was quiet. The lullaby had stopped. The watchers had vanished. The town itself seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting like a fog burned away by sunlight. Boards on the shattered windows rattled softly in the wind, the church stood, damaged, scarred, but standing. The pit had closed, sealed by the blood of the last Carter, by my blood, by the sacrifice I had made. I sank to the floor, trembling, spent, every nerve screaming, every muscle exhausted. Harlan and the others came to me cautiously, touching me, murmuring words I could barely comprehend, relief spilling from them in tremulous gasps. The old woman's chant had ended, and she collapsed into sobs, clutching my arm as if I were both child and savior. And then I realized the cost. My hand, wounded and bleeding, throbbed with life, but every drop had changed me. I felt different. Lighter, somehow, as though a weight I hadn't fully understood had been lifted, but also hollow, stretched, like a string cut too short. I understood the bargain fully now, the gateway was sealed, but the Carters ended with me. My line, the ones who had fed and restrained the watchers for centuries, was done. I was both savior and final offering. Outside, the town stirred cautiously, the first signs of life returning to the streets. Children blinked awake, people rubbed their eyes, unsure if the terror had been a dream. The sun, or maybe a sunlight glow from beyond the horizon, spilled through the clouds, soft and warm. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the watchers would not return. Not for a long, long time. But the final truth lingered in my mind like a shadow I could not shake. The world was safe, for now. But safety had been bought with the erasure of everything I had ever been connected to, the legacy of my family, the weight of centuries of sacrifice, the lives I could never bring back. I had closed the gate, yes. But I was alone, the last of the Carters, the final link in a chain that would never again exist. And I understood, fully, the cruelest twist of all, the town would sleep tonight. But I would never truly rest again. The church was still. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of blood, smoke, and damp earth. The altar, once pulsing with a life of its own, had become inert, splintered and cracked but still standing. The pit beneath it was gone, closed entirely, as though the earth itself had swallowed its hunger and shame. I sank to the floor, knees pressed into the wooden boards, my body trembling with exhaustion, adrenaline, and grief. Outside, the wind whispered softly through broken windows, carrying with it the scent of morning, the faint warmth of sunlight that had finally pierced the horizon. The town was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped outside, each movement hesitant, my eyes scanning the streets that had been alive with terror for so long. Windows that had glared at me with blackened faces now reflected nothing but the ordinary world, the town's terrors erased, or so it seemed. Children peeked from behind doors, rubbing their eyes, their faces still smudged from nightmares that had vanished, leaving them blinking into the gentle morning light. Adults emerged cautiously, whispering to one another, faces pale but alive. A sense of relief pulsed through the streets like a timid heartbeat, fragile and tentative. And yet, as I walked, I realized the absence of sound was not peace. It was emptiness. The lullaby was gone, the watchers had vanished, but the weight of what had occurred pressed against me, a gravity I could not shake. The streets felt unnervingly familiar, yet alien, as if the town had exhaled centuries of suffering in one long breath and now held its shape only by the memory of horror. I understood, in that moment, that the town had slept because I had sealed the gate, but my own heartbeat, my own blood, carried the final price of that victory. Harlan and the elders approached, slow and deliberate, their faces drawn tight with relief and fear. They did not speak at first, only watching me, watching how I moved, how I breathed. Finally, the old woman knelt beside me, whispering a trembling prayer over my hands, over the blood I had shed. "It's done," she said softly. "You've ended it. You've ended them." But I knew better. The Watchers were gone, yes, their hunger bound once more. The gateway was sealed. Yet the echoes of it remained, stitched into the very fabric of the town, in every brick, every shadow, every whisper carried by the wind. I could feel it in my veins, the legacy of the Carters, the burden of generations, the knowledge that one wrong step, one misremembered ritual, and the darkness would return. I was the final link. Alone, unbroken, and unyielding, but at a cost that no relief could erase. I walked to the edge of the town, staring back at the streets now bathed in sunlight. The trees swayed gently, the houses gleamed faintly, and yet in the corners of my vision, in the dark spaces between the familiar shapes, I glimpsed movement. Nothing fully formed. Shadows that lingered where they should not, whispering faintly in a language I could almost understand. I tried to shake it off, telling myself the last of the Watchers had retreated beyond the horizon, bound by my blood, the blood of the last Carter. And then I felt it, a pressure in the back of my skull, subtle at first, like a thought that didn't belong to me, a rhythm just beneath my heartbeat. I blinked, and for a fraction of a second, I saw it, a shadow stretching along the ground, long and impossibly thin, writhing in the corners of the street. It was not human. It was patient. Waiting. Watching. A chill ran through me. I realized the cruel truth of the entire ordeal. Closing the gate had won the battle, yes, but not the war. The Watchers were bound. The town was safe. But the darkness itself, the hunger beneath, the thing that had breathed through centuries of Carters, had not been destroyed. It had only been denied. And it remembered me. It would remember forever. I walked through the empty streets, past houses with doors now open to sunlight, past children who would never know the full terror that had once stalked their town. I was free to leave, free to continue my life, but something in me knew the cost of that freedom. I carried the last of the Carters' burden, the final seal, the memory of every life bound to the gate. The silence of the town was not victory, it was vigilance, a quiet that would never end. As I turned to leave, my shadow fell long and thin across the cobblestones, stretching unnaturally, merging with the remnants of darkness that clung to the town like a stain. And in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement again, a flicker, a pulse, a whisper carried on the wind. Never asleep, never gone. The town had finally slept. But the darkness had not. And I understood, fully, that some stories do not end. They only rest, waiting for the next heartbeat, the next drop of blood, the next Carter to return. The sun rose higher, casting light over the streets, the trees, the shattered church. The town was alive, quiet, normal, but the legacy, the hunger, and the shadows lingered. Forever. And in the distance, the wind carried a soft, almost imperceptible hum, just beneath consciousness, like a lullaby you think you've forgotten, but never truly can. The town had slept. But the story was not over.